to see, or for our ninth graders or 10th graders or 11th graders who are moving forward, those capstone courses are authentic. They're going out into the community and working with our businesses in partnership. We have businesses and community members coming in to work with our students, and the learning is taking on a lot of purpose and meaning that looks very different than what it did 10 years ago. And the last one I would point out is there was a call for online learning, being able to increase access to online learning for our students. We now have EP Online that serves over 600 students full time, and we have about 1,000 students taking supplemental courses through our EP Online full school. So those are a few of the changes that were called for inside of that plan that are now in place or well on their way to being really fully embedded inside of our system. So if you just do the quick math, we were doing that work in 2014-15. We're now in the year 24-25, just about 25, year 2025 in just a couple of weeks. And it begs the question, what does the next 10 years look like? So thus Flight Plan 2035, we're really thinking about going into the future, our kids' context about what might they need then. So what I'm going to ask you to do tonight and through this process is you have to kind of let go a little bit of what do we need tomorrow and really roll yourself forward 10 years from now and think about what might our kids need then. What should their educational experience, opportunities look like 10 years into the future so that we can design and really be in a great place at that point in time? So what should that experience be for our students in the year 2035? So our speaker series is designed to hopefully help you get a glimpse into the future of different aspects that might impact our need for education and what education should be. And so tonight we're going to hear a little bit about AI and what that might look like in the context of the world out in the future, what's coming. You're going to have to imagine a little bit. We're all imagining 10 years out, but we're going to have to make some guesses to design for that. And so I'm really excited to hear from our speaker tonight about artificial intelligence and what that might mean in the context of us also helping our kids develop human intelligence or authentic intelligence. Those two go hand in hand with each other, but I think there's some amazing changes that are on our way that we'd want to consider and think about. In the spirit of that, because this is totally virtual tonight, our feedback loop will be virtual as well. In the past, we've run our speaker series. In our speaker series, we've run world cafes at the end of the event. So we get into groups and tables and share our ideas and thinking, and then get to rotate around and kind of move that around. Tonight, we're going to be doing that virtually through our Eagle Voice platform. So once our speaker finishes, we'll take a couple of minutes to explain that platform because we want to make sure to gather that input and that feedback. Everything you submit, that's going to be going forward towards the design team that's going to be thinking about this. And that will be an iterative process. Once the design team creates their initial academic visioning design, I have already told them, and we'll repeat that to them, they're designing a rough draft. They're designing a first draft. We're going to put that back out to the community and ask for feedback. And we truly want that because you're going to see evolutions in that design over the course of the spring so that by the end of this school year in June, we have our final academic vision for the next 10 years with large scale input from our community that's reflective of that. I do just want to thank Dr. Sassini, too, who spoke on the short video at the beginning. FEPS did provide a $100,000 grant towards our Emerging Technologies Lab. And when we talk about lab, there's some physical space and there's physical tools, but there was also concepts of that concept of a lab of like, we're going to try things, we're going to do things, and we're going to learn things together. And so part of that, that grant was to host speaker series like this in about areas of technology and how it's going to evolve. So I'm really excited tonight. So thank you to FEPS for doing that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Denise or Julie to launch our speaker and do a quick introduction. Hang with us at the end to be able to provide your feedback and get those instructions. And I just truly want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us this evening, learn a little bit about AI, and be able to provide us with some great input and feedback as we build this next plan out together. So welcome and enjoy some learning tonight.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Swanson. We appreciate the overview of everything that you had shared about the process, what we're working on. I think from both Julie and I's perspective, just for our audience members to know, we really feel as we work with school districts around the country that Eden Prairie is very forward thinking and doing incredible work to be thinking about 10 years ahead of time and being very thoughtful about what that planning might be so that all students can have a fabulous experience. So kudos to Eden Prairie, Dr. Swanson and the team. We really appreciate the opportunity to work with you. So this evening, it is my pleasure to be able to introduce to you our third speaker in our speaker series and welcome Greg Verdino about the future of learning. Greg is a digital strategist, and I was lucky enough to learn from him a couple of months ago and thought, wow, this is an amazing person that can help us think about what that student experience might be like for our students and our staff in the future as we plan. Let me tell you a little bit about Greg. He's a highly regarded authority in the digital now, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about now and why we aren't going back to the past. He's known for his uncanny ability to forecast trends, spot the difference between fads and the future, and empower organizations to thrive in the place of exponential change, which, by the way, we all know is not going away. It's going to continue, right? For 30 years, Greg has worked as a forefront of a change agent, advising more than 50 Fortune 500 and senior leadership positions at half a different technology startups. What he shares with you tonight, I think you'll find thought-provoking. It will really help us to think about the future needs of our students. And I think just overall, you're really going to enjoy some of the information that he shares with you. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Greg Verdino for his presentation. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Denise. Everyone should be able to see what I'm sharing now. Unfortunately, I can't see any of you. I'm not sure if there's one of you or 1,000 of you, but welcome everybody. Thank you for taking time tonight. I was really inspired listening to what Dr. Swanson was saying about the way the district is thinking about creating the future of education for people, for children in your community. Um, I'm in a great school district on Long Island, and I wish my district would do this kind of stuff, frankly. I think in a lot of ways you're very fortunate to be in a district that is really thinking about what the next 10 years might look like. And might is the key word here. And I think Dr. Swanson said, we can't predict what the world will look like in 10 years. Anyone who tells you that they can is lying to you, quite frankly. I meet with a lot of business leaders, a lot of people at large technology companies, the companies that are creating amazing new technology tools and platforms, companies like IBM and Google and Amazon and Apple and the people who are building these tools themselves frankly don't know exactly how these tools will affect the world we're living in and what the future looks like. But it is very important to keep an open mind about a future, the possibility of a future that will be very different from the world we experience today. And that's really what I'm going to talk about. I will certainly speak quite a bit about artificial intelligence and some of the ways that artificial intelligence is playing out today. But I'm going to also try to paint a broader perspective around change and the human skills, the authentic human intelligence that we bring with us into the future, and why it is important to think about artificial intelligence as a way of augmenting human intelligence, not a threat to the things that we can do and what we represent as human beings. And I'll cover probably a lot of ground. I'm going to before I jump in, I do want to point out, although I've been to Minnesota many times. I've never had the pleasure of visiting Eden Prairie, but I actually found out because my wife peeked at my calendar that her aunt and uncle for a long time lived in Eden Prairie. I've been told not to mention their last name because apparently their oldest daughter was a bit of a troublemaker. So I don't want to get anybody in any more trouble than they need to be. And they've since moved away, I understand. But from what I know, they did enjoy their time living there. All right, so let's dive in. So, as Denise mentioned, I've if there's been I guess if there's been a common thread in my career, it has been change. I've worked in a number of different industries. I spent a lot of my career in marketing. I've worked in media. I've worked in technology startups. I've worked in management consultancies. I've been a small business owner. I've failed at owning a small business. I've succeeded at owning a small business. Right now I'm a partner in a small business that focuses on AI consultancy, largely for nonprofits, associations, and a wee little bit for some federal government agencies. So I've moved around from industry to industry. I've held lots of different kinds of roles, but the constant in my career has really been, for one reason or another, I've always been the guy in the company I've worked in who's been focused on what's coming next, how the world is changing, and why it is important for organizations to embrace change. Now, that's been the case for probably centuries, and my career has gone decades, and change has been a constant, of course, as the old adage says, change is the only constant, right? But certainly over the course of the past decade or so, we've seen an increase in the pace of change. And that's created a lot of challenges for a lot of organizations and a lot of people in organizations, whether that's education or business or government or the private sector, the public sector. It is challenging to keep pace with the rate of change, and that's really brought a lot of organizations to a point of disruption. And I'm sure you've all heard the term, or at least many of you, I would imagine, have heard the term digital disruption. And if you are a business person or have work in really virtually any sector, you've probably heard a lot of sort of the narrative around the importance for organizations to transform in the face of disruption, to undergo a digital transformation. So we've been seeing a lot of change happen around us as organizations, industries, everything from schools to restaurants to name your industry, insurance agencies to banks to retail establishments, really embrace digital technologies more, as we're doing even, for example, on this particular learning session, which has gone entirely virtual. But as I worked with more and more organizations who were looking to understand how do we deal with the challenge of disruption, it became evident to me that it was more and more important to think less about the challenge of disruption and more about the promise of creation, or essentially creative disruption or creative destruction. How do we move forward rather than look back and pine for, sort of a return to the old normal? And certainly when COVID struck, and I mean, now I can't believe we're 5 years past the height of COVID. What I found was I was having a lot of conversations with people who were asking me, because of what I do for a living, when are we going to settle into a new normal? And and as I thought about it, it kind of struck me that's probably the wrong question to ask, which led me to this concept. And I wrote a book that kind of hinged around this concept, and I've used this concept in talking to people across a wide variety of industries. This idea of not a new normal, but a never normal. That we've entered this point where the pace and the prevalence of change is so high that we need to learn to adapt to wave after wave of change and expect that we will be entering a future that bears little to no resemblance to the past or even the present. Now, change is going to come from a wide variety of directions. My work is predominantly around technology, and we're speaking today primarily about technology. But obviously, technology is not the only force of change that's causing the kind of disruption and, in many ways, frankly, as individuals, the unease we feel at work, at home, in the world around us. Certainly, I mentioned COVID already. It kind of points to the likelihood of things like like biological disruptions or shocks to the system, economic shocks to the system. The economy remains incredibly unsteady and almost unpredictable since COVID. There's certainly geopolitical forces at play. There's the potential of, there are climate change forces at play, all these different things that are happening that exacerbate the amount of change our institutions and we as individuals go through. And when you put all of this together into what I call the never normal, this state of always on change that we are living in and living through today, it becomes obvious that we're not going back in time. We're not going to go back to an old normal that looks and feels like the status quo a lot of us have become very much used to. But at the same time, we can't sit and wait for a new normal to emerge. As I said earlier, I wish my district would do something like this. Many districts, I am sure, are waiting to see what happens, to reach a point where, like that 10-year horizon and that end point at the 10-year horizon becomes so much more predictable, where you can say, oh, this is what the future will look like. The problem is if you wait for that change to happen, the change has happened to you. Whereas if you build a plan today, you step into the future and you kind of cast backwards to today, you gain an opportunity to really create what that future looks like for yourselves and most importantly for your children who are growing up in this environment. A friend of mine, a sort of a former ad man named Rashad Tabakawala, retired and he kind of reimagined himself as something of a business philosopher. He is a very, very wise man. And he uses a phrase that I just absolutely love, which is the future does not fit in the containers of the past, by which he means essentially that we can't design a future assuming that it will look a whole lot like today, just a little bit faster, just a little bit more digital, just a little bit different. We need to think broadly. We need to imagine a future that could be wholly different, that we're not on a straight line path from today to tomorrow. There is a disruption in that path. So that we need to be prepared for a future that could be very, very different. As I said, I can't tell you exactly what that future is going to look like, but I do know it will be very different. I happened to just this morning see, I'm going to call it a tweet because everyone still calls them tweets, but it was a post on X from the World Economic Forum about an article that they published yesterday about aligning the workforce and education to, the future as it plays out. And the tweet itself included this sort of statistic where they project, again, they don't know, but they project that 65% of the children entering school today will work in job categories that don't exist yet. So think about that. The children who are in school today, if we continue to follow the same curriculum, the same programs, the same ways of teaching, are being prepared for a world that will not exist by the time they graduate. And potentially, in a worst case scenario, 65% of them, according to this number, could be wholly unprepared for the world that they will enter when they leave academia, right? That's a scary proposition if you just sit back and wait for that to happen. This is why it is critically important that all of us think about what is the right way to educate students for the future and to ask the question. And this is to me I guess it is a perfect illustration of a future that does not fit in the containers of the past. It's important to ask the question, if the world is changing faster than our schools, and it is, generally speaking, because it's changing faster than all of our institutions, how do we ensure that the students are in our schools today don't get left behind? And that's the challenge that we have as parents. That's the challenge that administrators and teachers have as educators. And I believe, fundamentally the challenge that we have as a society, right, is to prepare our children to thrive in this future that is yet to become fully clear before our eyes. And I don't say this to, I don't want to come across as sort of the, oh my God, let's be scared of this future or be discouraging, because I think it is an exciting opportunity if we seize the opportunity and play an active role in shaping the future of education and helping our children thrive. Um, so I'm gonna now, kind of dive into technology and Dr. Swanson promised you AI, and we're going to talk AI. So, beginning with sort of a big picture around artificial intelligence, for many people, and I can't do a show of hands because I won't see any hands, but for a lot of people, the idea of artificial intelligence seemed to have emerged very suddenly outside the realm of science fiction, very suddenly in the real world 2 or so years ago, when we first started hearing about ChatGPT and generative artificial intelligence, the kind of AI that's capable of doing things like writing essays and songs and poems and making pictures and videos, the kind of artificial intelligence that effectively creates content the way previously only humans could create content. The truth of the matter is, we've been living for quite a while with artificial intelligence. Um, it's a field that dates back to the 1950s. And even if you think about your own life, traditional artificial intelligence, what is now more generally known as machine learning, and I'm not going to get too technical here, I promise, but traditional artificial intelligence or machine learning has been at work in our lives, running in the background, operating many, many services and devices that we consider to be just part of our lives, right? Of course, it's running, we have machine learning running on our smartphones. It's running in our Alexa and on our Siri. It's recommending the movies you might enjoy on Netflix, the songs you might enjoy on Spotify. It's providing you with the posts it thinks you want to see all over social media and so on and so forth. And this sort of race towards smarter and smarter machines has, of course, been going on far longer than even AI has been at work, where, way back in like the turn of the last century, 1900 or so, the first concept of a computer emerged onto the scene. But it wasn't really until, I've got a sort of we are here, kind of arrow pointing. It wasn't really until just a few years ago that a computer processor reached a point where it had the same general intelligence as a mouse. And even then, we thought computers were incredibly powerful. But just a couple of years ago, artificial intelligence that effectively had comparable brain power to a single human, at least in certain areas, came onto the scene in the form of ChatGPT and its underlying, technologies and a bunch of competitive technologies to that. Now, if you've played with these tools at all, and I know many people have, you know that they are really impressive at some things and really unimpressive at others, include as I'm sure, I am in fact impressive at some things and quite unimpressive at many, many things as a human being. Um, but certainly it's the first time we've had a machine that's been able to mimic human intelligence and human, at least communication, if not behavior, in a way that is convincing enough that it can fool people as to whether or not it is a machine or a person. Now, if you believe the forecast on this chart, and this is a chart that was developed originally by a futurist named Ray Kurzweil, and he now works at Google, but has been a futurist for many, many years across many different technology companies, and has worked with many, many organizations across all different sectors. His projection has been that by around 2045, a single computer will have the same general intelligence as every human brain on Earth combined, right? So 2045 is another decade out beyond 2035. But imagine that we are even at that halfway point, 2035, how smart a machine will be. And think about, again, I can't tell you what the implications will be. I might make some guesses, but imagine a world where every one of your children, every one of you has access to technology that is that intelligent, is that capable of imitating human intelligence and undertaking human-like actions, and how different that world will be. And think about a world in which that machine will be able to do so many of the things that we take for granted as human tasks. The work we do, for example, the things we create, could potentially be largely created, generated by machines, with or without human guidance, right? So imagine that world, and this is why it's so important to think about what that might look like and what the implications of that could be 10 years down the road. Because it's that kind of technological change happening at that speed that creates this environment in which your kids, my kids, are going to be working in jobs that don't exist yet, or potentially living in a world where humans may not work at all, if you take certain projections and certain points of view. So, um, I know that's very heady, and I've kind of covered a lot of space, but let's kind of like now, kind of like if we kind of focus now in on like, so what's really happening with AI today, and talk about some of the things that are going on. As I said, a lot of the energy these days are around a certain type of artificial intelligence called generative AI. An AI that doesn't just analyze the data it's been trained on to find patterns, but is able to effectively imitate those patterns and create new data of its own. And that's exactly what these tools are doing. I don't want to assume that anybody is, really technical or really, really untechnical about what's going on. So I'm going to kind of hit this middle ground. So if you're aware of this, I'm going to validate what you know. If you're not aware of this, it's going to be new to you. the um, it appears that these tools, these technologies, tools like ChatGPT, which is the most common, everyone I'm sure has heard of ChatGPT, are actually being creative, are actually generating wholly new and novel ideas and stories and essays and pictures and whatever else, right? The truth of the matter is they are merely prediction machines. All they are doing is taking the question you provide to them in the form of a prompt and making effectively, I'm going to oversimplify this, but effectively making a word by word prediction as to what the answer should be based on all of the data it's been trained on. So it can't create anything that has never been created before. It can kind of blur the boundaries of that, but it's essentially creating a remix, not something truly new. It is a mimicry machine, which is why if you use these tools for any period of time, you tend to find they use the same speech patterns over and over. They overuse the same kinds of words. There's a kind of a running gag that if you see the word delve appear more than a few times in a given piece of writing, you know that it was generated by ChatGPT, right? Or if your essay ends with in conclusion, because it's been trained on millions upon millions of essays that were written with a final paragraph that ended in conclusion. It doesn't know how to break those boundaries unless you kind of coax it and prod it, right? So it's powerful. It's incredibly powerful. It can increase productivity. These tools can increase efficiency, effectiveness, sometimes even improve quality of output. But they are not miracle machines. They are, as I said, mimicry machines. So now the question, of course, is, who's using these things? I actually saw an interesting piece of research yesterday from Goldman Sachs that said that they've found that businesses, only 6% of businesses are actually fully integrating these kinds of technologies. Um, that I think in a lot of ways underplays the extent to which these businesses are experimenting with these technologies, because certainly with the clients I work with, and many of them are in fairly traditional, slow-moving sectors like the public sector or not-for-profit, um, and we're seeing a lot of experimentation, but when you think about the full integration of these tools into the way an organization operates, the number probably is relatively low. Um, but when you look at what's happening in our personal lives, in this case, teachers, students, and parents, what you find is that roughly half of each of those populations are using these tools with some degree of frequency. So this is a question to kind of ask yourself honestly about your own behavior. Think about what your own kids might be doing. Think about how your teachers might be teaching your kids in classrooms. You know, that roughly one out of every two of you, if this data is correct, are using these tools at least once a week. Right? You've habituated the use of these tools. And it might be for trivial things. It might be to, look for a quick and easy answer to something that previously you might have gone to Google for, or it might be to, write, a thank you note or an out of office email, or what it might be for something much more substantial. I use these tools every single day. I use them to assist with writing, even though I am by nature a writer. I use them to help me think through thoughts. I use them to outline meeting agendas. I use them to challenge me. If I have an idea, I throw the idea in and say, tell me what are the flaws in this idea. What I don't use it for is just to barf out a finished product in any case. And that's, something that, you know, if there is one thing to tell your kids as students, it's that these machines make mistakes. Their output is not perfect, and you need to always apply a healthy dose of critical thinking and what in the nerd industry I'm in, we call human in the loop, which means basically at the end of the day, as a person, you're responsible for the output. Um, and make sure that you're not just trusting these tools to do the work for you. But it's certainly, we are beginning to see these tools become much more prevalent. It is important to learn how to use these tools. As I said, adoption might be spotty still in many organizations and businesses in the workplace, but increasingly I'm hearing from hiring managers in a wide variety of organizations that they will not consider candidates even today who do not have a baseline understanding of how artificial intelligence works and how to use generative AI tools like ChatGPT and how to use them responsibly and effectively. So it's becoming increasingly important to think about how do we integrate AI into education, not make it a scenario where it's considered cheating to use AI. And we've heard that refrain before. This clipping from a newspaper article is from, I don't know when, the 70s or 80s, when teachers were protesting the use of calculators in the classroom. And I know some classrooms probably still don't allow the use of calculators, but it will likely become more and more common that the use of AI will be encouraged in learning, not prohibited. That said, I do know in a lot of schools, the mindset is if you use AI, you are cheating. Um, but what's interesting about that is there have been some studies that show even AI does a really poor job of delineating what has been created by AI. And this one study in particular from Bloomberg jumped out at me because AI was flagging essays that were written before the release of ChatGPT as having been AI generated. And by and large, by a order of magnitude difference, the essays it was flagging as AI generated were essays written by humans who were not neurologically typical. So any kid on an IEP might have their work falsely flagged as written by AI, right? So we have to think about these kinds of things and be aware of these kinds of things and conscious of these kinds of things as we think about how we use them, when we use them, where we use them. And also what all of this means to the way our children are educated in an environment where AI is becoming more and more commonplace and is essentially becoming as as essential a STEM skill in many ways as math and science. Um, so we're seeing a lot of technologies come to the market that I would kind of classify as educational AI for good, ed tech for good. You may be familiar with Khan Academy. It's been around for quite a while as a, sort of an alt learning platform, a digital learning environment. A lot of innovation coming out of this particular company, and they have this premise that there is a tutor, they call it a Conmigo, an amigo from Khan, who is always available, right? So not every kid benefits from having easy access to a tutor. Not every family can afford tutoring for their kid. Not every kid is comfortable sitting down with a tutor, right? There's a lot of reasons why children might not get the tutoring help that they need as part of their routine education. But the premise of a Conmigo is anyone can have access to an AI-powered tutor. And it's got to, they offer a wide variety of services. They offer services for teachers, and many teachers will use these things to do things like improve lesson plans and come up with tests, and I even potentially, work on IEPs and things like that. There's a wide variety of teaching tools. But they do offer, I believe, all free services for learners and parents, things like test prep and AI powered Q&A and kind of self quizzing and things like that. They promise to make, on demand, that their on demand help makes homework time a breeze, which I know for a lot of parents is probably music to your ears, right? So having a tutor that's available 24/7, not that your kid's up 24/7, hopefully, to be able to sit there and assist your student in solving problems that they can't solve on their own, to be able to get through their homework more efficiently, more effective, and learn more in the process. There are obviously other examples of this. There's something called Tutor Copilot, which actually works with tutors to make them better at teaching kids math. And I'm terrible at math. I can hardly do anything with a calculator. And when my kid comes home and he's in fourth grade, I don't even understand the way he is being taught math today. I know what the answers are. I can get to the answers, but he's got totally different methodologies. So imagine a scenario like that where, a tutor might be behind the times in the latest way of solving certain math problems, but has access to an AI that essentially is able to, proverbially whisper them the answers that they can then use to better instruct a child. These are, so a lot of these solutions are really point to the ways that AI is coming to the table to augment human instruction so that the human instructors, the teachers, the tutors can focus on the things that matter most, and some of the routine comes off of their plate a little bit so that they can really truly engage with your children on more of a one-to-one basis, deliver more personalized learning, and create a much richer, more engaging education experience. Now, of course, you can go too far with this kind of thing. These are two real examples. On the easy one is on the right-hand side of the screen. Harvard apparently is going to be introducing AI instructors next semester to teach students, which I guess starts in just a few weeks, to teach students without a human instructor in the room or in the virtual room. This other example is an interesting one, that there's a high school in, I believe, the UK somewhere, that is replacing teachers with AI. And the unfortunate thing is they're replacing special education teachers and specials teachers. So special ed, arts, and so on and so forth. They fully believe that they need, that it, that the general classroom teacher, a good general classroom teacher, is far better than artificial intelligence, but they're effectively seizing on the opportunity of a budget cut to supplement those general education teachers with AIs. To me, this takes AI a step too far, right? That it kind of feeds into this narrative that anything that can be done by AI will be done by AI, and all of us will see mass, widespread unemployment across many, many fields. I do like to believe, I'm a tech optimist. I like to believe that, fundamentally, this is technology best used to augment our human capabilities, not replace our humanity. But there is a potential future that could arrive within 10 years where these kinds of replacements become more and more common. So think about, as you're thinking about your 10-year flight plan, um, where is the right balance between augmentation and replacement? And how should you design the educational environment for the children in your community and for the adults who work with those children in your community? And then there's the Holy Grail, and I've yet to see this, and this is, I guess, my joke for Monty Python fans, but I've yet to see this outside of the corporate world. But I think some of what we're seeing already in large organizations might point to a future that is plausible, certainly, if not probable, over time. I'm going to share an example with you. This is from a company called Publicis. They're a global company. They own many, many marketing services firms. And they have a system called Marcel, which is an AI-powered system. It's called Marcel, named after their founder. And they provide personalized learning plans for every employee in the company based on what they know, what they don't know, their interests, their disinterests, their likes, their dislikes, what they've learned before, what they haven't learned before, what skills are essential for them to remain competitive in their role, what skills are essential for them to advance in their role. And there are literally hundreds of thousands of truly unique, individually personalized learning plans compiled from thousands upon thousands of specific pieces of courseware that are being delivered, every single year to their employees around the globe, right? So imagine a world in which your students are able to get exactly the right learning they need at the right time, the right place, and the right pace for their particular style of learning and their interests and their aptitudes and their capacity, right? That's potentially, when AI is employed properly and positively in education, potentially where we go. And to me, that's incredibly exciting. So when we think about the world that our students are graduating into, and this is not 2035, this is 2027, we start to get a picture of the kinds of skills that the companies that will employ our kids are going to be most interested in. I'm going to cover all of these in one way, shape, or form as we go. The first two I want to point to really speak to technological literacy, right? Which are AI and big data literacy, and more broadly, technological literacy. I believe we have an opportunity when it comes to AI in particular right now to kind of correct the course that many school districts, and I can't speak for Eden Prairie, but many school districts still don't teach social media literacy, still don't teach baseline digital literacy beyond, potentially giving kids a Chromebook, right? And having them work a bit in Google Classroom, right? So, let's think about how we start to build AI literacy today, rather than saying you cannot use ChatGPT to write your book report on Catcher in the Rye. You must use ChatGPT to write your book report on Catcher in the Rye, but you need to be prepared to critique what it got right, what it got wrong, the points you agree with, the points you disagree with, cite additional sources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whatever it is, right? Like, so you're actually doing the work and you're learning from the experience, even if you're not writing the words, right? So how do we integrate AI and build that kind of literacy the way, as I heard from Dr. Swanson, the way you're building literacy around business skills and financial acumen and so on and so forth for kids in your middle school and high school? At the same time, there is a dark side to these tools in the same way there has been a dark side to the entire social media revolution and in many ways all of the internet. There's a ton of tremendous promise. There's also peril that I think as the adults in the room, whether we're educators, whether we're just community leaders, business leaders, whether we're parents, whether we're some of all of that, need to not only be well aware of, but need to be thinking about how do we educate and prepare our children to thrive in a world where, for example, um, AI is going to make it easier than ever for bad actors to not only create but distribute disinformation at a scale we cannot even comprehend. Already today, roughly 90% of the content on the internet has been in some way created, edited, or otherwise kind of transformed by artificial intelligence today. It is trivial to create an entire news site that looks and feels like a real news site, but is entirely full of disinformation and conspiracy theories in minutes. Right. And I was reading a study recently where 94% of teenagers would love to have media literacy training as part of the curriculum in their school district. Very few school districts have media literacy training. Um, and media literacy training is going to become more and more important as the nature of media and the scale and scope of media generated by unreliable AI systems just explodes. We also need to be aware of, I think, the really two things and make sure our children are aware of this. Number one, there's a tremendous amount of bias baked into these systems, and that bias emerges quite easily. And we need to be very tuned into what bias looks like and sounds like when it's generated by an AI, so that we can spot it and correct for it in anything that we produce, whether it's an essay or a learning plan or anything else. At the same time, everything you create, especially if you're using a free version of an AI system, if you're not paying a monthly fee, everything you create is training the next iteration of that AI system. So essentially, you're working for free for the billionaires in Silicon Valley, but more importantly, all of your ideas, your intellectual property, your creativity is being put out there and made essentially property of the world. So it's important for students to understand that as well, especially a student that might be, for example, particularly interested in the arts. What might the implications of using a free chat GPT to outline your creative writing project mean if you want to seriously be a creative writer, an author, even a journalist when you grow up. To give an interesting kind of like, almost trivial example of the way bias can seep into these systems and um, how kind of it's kind of like how folks, people, users tend not to be aware of these kinds of things. A university did a study with teenagers where the teenagers had to use an AI to, it was something to the effect of have the AI predict for you or recommend to you the best kind of dwelling if you had a pet cow. And you had to specify that it was a brown cow. What the students who were part of this study did not know was the AI had been trained on the kinds of animals that might live in different kinds of settings: an apartment, a house with an outside garden, a country home, let's say on a farm. But the training data overwhelmingly put brown pets, even though they were cats and dogs and, typical household pets, they were all brown for the apartment. So if you ask where should I live if I have a brown cow as a pet, consistently the AI said you should live in an apartment because it was hearing brown and it had learned that brown, it's as far as it knew, the way the world works, brown animals live in apartments. The black and white and gray and spotted animals live in houses with gardens and they live on farms, right? So if you asked where should I go if I have a spotted cow, it might have told you to buy a farm, but as long as you had a brown cow, it told you to buy an apartment, right? This kind of like bias training data, and this is a trivial example, is in there. And the thing is that if you took this answer, if one of your, if a kid went into school on Monday and said, I'm buying a cow and I'm putting him in my apartment, imagine what the response would be to that. But they might not know that that is not accurate if they assume the technology is 100% on point. We also need to be aware of the reality that our kids are already forming close and emotional personal relationships with AI. I don't know if you're familiar with a service called Character AI. There are teenagers who firmly believe that their boyfriend or girlfriend is an artificial intelligence avatar generated by Character AI. In many cases, this is totally harmless. It's creative play in a way, the same way my kid is obsessed with Roblox. And, my daughter is obsessed still with, TikTok and Instagram. But there are scenarios where obviously it's been not quite so harmless. You may have heard this story about a teenager in Florida who committed suicide after being urged to do so by his AI girlfriend. Um, Obviously, there may have been other factors at play, but we need to be really tuned into these kinds of things because we just don't see them happening. We don't see them coming. It's the same kind of thing where a decade ago, or maybe even today, you maybe don't know exactly what your kid is doing on their phone or on social media applications. With AI, it has the potential to be that much worse. Another example, this was just this week or end of last week. This was a college kid who was using an AI to work through a term paper and was doing a lot of back and forth. And apparently, the AI got aggravated with the back and forth and returned this message at the end of the conversation. You can read it for yourself. Um, so these kinds of things are baked into the system, unfortunately, and these kinds of mistakes happen. You need to be aware of this and make sure your kids are aware that these kinds of things could happen. Um, just briefly want to just like mention, I'm talking a lot about AI. AI is not the only technology that is shaping the future. You already, obviously have a very a robust virtual learning environment for the district. Increasingly, we're going to see augmented and virtual reality become more of a real thing, right? Virtual worlds like a Roblox, like a Minecraft, like a Fortnite could potentially become I would say, sort of the prototype for our future educational environments in many ways, which would be, of course, very engaging for kids who are growing up with those kinds of technologies and tools. And it's obvious, whether it's 65% of kids training for, or potentially getting jobs that don't exist today, or even just learning how to use these technologies that we have available to us today, the workforce of the future will be, I mean, life of the future, but certainly the workforce of the future, the line will be increasingly blurred between humanity and technology. We will be working more seamlessly with all sorts of different technologies. And that's why, again, when I bring us back to these sort of 10, business skill priorities, it is no accident that at least 7 out of the 10, depending on how you define, how do you think about design and user experience, at least 7 out of the 10 are uniquely human skills. Things like analytical thinking, creative thinking, leadership, social influence, resilience, curiosity and lifelong learning, motivation, empathy, active listening. It is critically important that when we think about preparing students for the future, it's not just about how do we build digital literacy, media literacy, and AI literacy. It's how do we build literacy in all of these other areas. Because ultimately, the technology skills, the technical skills, the nuts and bolts of doing will increasingly be taken over by technology. If it is rote, routine, or repeatable, technology can do it really well. If it is unpredictable and fundamentally emotional, that's where humans retain a distinct advantage over technology. So the way we think about, we should be thinking about how do we prepare our students to embody these capacities as well as they possibly can so that they can thrive, that they can be more adaptable in the face of change. We're running short on time because I'm just blabbing and blabbing. And I can't see any of your reactions, so I don't know if everyone's tuned out or turned off. But another area, because I've been so focused on change as sort of a driving force in my career, is I've focused over the past, 5 years or so on this idea of human adaptability and organizational adaptability. And a colleague and I had done some research pre-COVID, interestingly enough, about how organizations and individuals in organizations embody adaptability in a way that allows them to thrive in the face of change, not just survive in the face of change. And we kind of built a manifesto. I don't know why I didn't put the URL here, but it's at adaptmanifesto.org. That kind of bubbled everything down to a bunch of principles. I'm not going to walk you through all of these principles, but this might be something that you could reference as you're thinking about the next 10 years, and how you can both embody these principles for yourself, kind of bring these principles to life in your district, in your curricula, in the way your school engages students and faculty, and families, but also kind of how you might build these competencies for yourself or support the growth in these competencies for your children. Fundamentally, it means embracing ambiguity. Again, Dr. Swanson said it at the beginning. I said it after he said it. Nobody knows how the future will turn out. Nobody knows, even if you look at AI specifically, will it be a net positive, a net negative, or somewhere in between? But we need to embrace that ambiguity. Like the future is not waiting for you to figure out what it's going to look like, right? It's I think imperative on all. It's imperative for all of us to really imagine what a possible range of future scenarios might look like and do the best we can to design a plan that allows us to thrive regardless of how the future turns out. And that means not waiting for change to settle in and become the new normal. It means embracing that never normal. The second thing is being a student of change. I know I've thrown a lot at you today, but I would encourage you to be, you to be relentlessly curious about how the world is changing, about experimenting with tools like AI, about understanding and learning. What are your kids thinking about these things? How do they feel about these things? What are they passionate about? What are they frightened about? And then, of course, kind of keeping an eye out, whether it's through reading or watching or whatever, for kind of what are others saying and doing, and how is the world truly changing around us? This is another one of my favorite futurists, a man named Alvin Toffler. He wrote Future Shock, which was his most famous book. But in another one of his books, he talked about the illiterate of the 21st century not being those who can't read or write, which is not an indictment on reading or writing. Yes, we still need to know how to read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And I think there's a real obligation and opportunity for all of us to learn, unlearn, right? Give up some of those assumptions that maybe don't hold quite so true anymore and relearn, come up with new ways of being, new ways of thinking, new ways of teaching, new ways of preparing our children for the future. And we should be encouraging the same in our kids so that they have this lifelong curiosity and passion for relearning. Because as technology takes on more and more tasks, every one of us, and them most of all, will need to reach up and kind of grab that next task that's right out of technology's reach, that technology can't do in a way that a human can. Kind of evolve essentially, right, to a point where it's sort of what I call revolution through evolution. Even if it's taking a small step, making a small change of every day, really having that pathway towards a future that doesn't fit into the containers of the past, a 10-year plan that gets you to a system and a society that is fundamentally different from what it is today and that bears your mark of creation. The architect Buckminster Fuller said that we're called to be the architects of the future, not its victims. And I guess if I have a message here, it's that, right? That's the call to action, to kind of hopefully take some of what you've heard today, if some of it interested you, inspired you, kind of opened your mind, gave you something you hadn't been thinking about before, and think about how that influences the way you build the flight plan that gets your district to 2035. And that's what I've got. So thank you very much. Hopefully this was helpful, interesting, useful, and enjoy the next part of your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you taking time to speak with us this evening. Again, as Dr. Swanson said, we really appreciate the foundation for supporting this work so that we can have people like you, thought leaders, come in and share with the community things that we should be thinking about. A couple of things that you had mentioned is that the flight plan, I think, is attempting to address, right, is that whole concept of not having change happen to us, but really being a steward and being able to create the future that we want for our students and being the architect of the future and creating that flight plan together. So we appreciate your perspectives on both the promise and the challenges of the technology and how it might shape our future and what we learn and know as students and adults and families trying to give our students the best experience possible. So thank you again. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, with that, I will pass it over to Grace, who is going to walk our audience participators to be able to go and look at the Eagle Voice. I know I saw some chats and some questions and things with great ideas coming up, and we want to make sure and capture that. So I will let Grace walk us through the